James Rowan's hands gripped the flight controls of the RV-7 amphibian, knuckles white under the strain. The starship shuddered, its hull groaning as it was tossed about in the alien storm. Rain lashed at the viewport, the sound like railgun fire as the ship descended through the chaos of lightning and winds. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the storm howled outside, threatening to tear apart the ship. The amphibian, his life's greatest achievement, was on the verge of collapse. It had been designed for impossible versatility, able to transition seamlessly from the void of space to the oceans of unknown worlds, but nothing could withstand a storm like this. His face was etched with strain, a storm unlike anything he had encountered before, a storm that bent the laws of physics with its ferocity. Red warnings flashed across the navigation console, a cascade of failure notifications that filled the cabin with electronic panic. James toggled the emergency systems, cursing under his breath. His vessel, the culmination of 15 years of work, was on the edge of ruin. The amphibian's triple-layered hull, with self-healing polymers and adaptive ballast systems, had protected it through countless trials, but this was too much. This was beyond design specifications. The outer stabilization fins had been torn away, and his communication arrays were barely functional. With a grunt, he turned the controls once more, struggling against the pull of the storm. He could feel the amphibian fighting back, but it was weakening. "Just hold together, not now, not when we're so close," he whispered to the ship, his voice rough with exhaustion. The mission had been desperate, far from established trade routes, in a place where he knew no one would follow. He had run from the corporate enforcers who were after his research, after his technology, after everything he had worked for. He was trying to reach an unmapped water world on the edge of charted space, hoping that there, in the vast expanse of unknown waters, he could find refuge. But now, the very ship he had trusted with his life was failing him. Lightning split the sky once more, illuminating the cabin with blue, then fading into darkness. The storm seemed to howl louder, almost as if it was alive, a living entity with a thirst for destruction. James gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the display in front of him. Come on, hold it together, just a little longer. But then the ship lurched, throwing him forward. His body slammed into the restraints, bone-crushing force pressing him against the harness as the ship began to tilt. A deafening crack echoed as a chunk of the hull splintered, and seawater began to pour into the lower compartments. The amphibian was sinking. He could feel it. The lights flickered out, leaving only the red warning symbols on the console to illuminate the darkened cockpit. Panic surged in his chest. He wasn't supposed to die here, not like this. His fingers scrambled for the emergency release, eyes scanning the chaotic console for any sign of hope. The backup systems were failing too. The self-healing polymers had activated, but they were already overwhelmed. The hull was breached too deeply. "No," he whispered, the word almost lost under the wail of the alarms. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the impending death that loomed. As the ship pitched and groaned, he knew this wasn't a controlled landing. It was a crash, and it was coming fast. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the cabin, a familiar sound, something that should have been comforting, but now only made his chest tighten with pain. "Daddy, I built a water engine today. Mrs. Holt said it's the best she's ever seen from a 9-year-old. I used the hydraulic principles you taught me, but I added my own compression chamber that makes it 30% more efficient." The voice, his daughter Sarah's, came from the ship's archival retrieval system. James hit a button on his command bracelet, bringing up the playback. The recording continued, bright with the sound of his daughter's enthusiasm, so full of life. "I calculated that it could power a small shuttle across the entire lake on just half a liter of water. Oh, and I figured out what was wrong with the atmosphere scrubbers in the residential dome. It wasn't a filtration problem at all. It was a pressure differential." His fingers clenched against the controls as he listened, Sarah's voice a bittersweet anchor in the storm. A moment of calm, a moment of memory. James swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes as he continued to fight the ship. "Not now, Sarah, not now," he murmured under his breath. The amphibian was sinking too fast. He needed to make a choice, but what choice was there when everything was already lost? He turned the ship's thrusters down into the deep channel ahead, a potential path to calmer waters. He could make it, he thought, if he could just clear the worst of the storm. But then, just as he began to breathe a little easier, the ship's navigation system beeped. An error, a massive one. Out of nowhere, a jagged basalt spire pierced through the water. It was invisible to the instruments, only becoming apparent at the moment of impact. The ship slammed into it with a force that ripped through the hull. James was thrown forward, his body snapping into the restraints with bone-crushing force. "Shit," he yelled, but there was no time for curses now. The amphibian was going down. With everything in his mind focused on survival, he reached behind his seat, grabbing the only two things that mattered: the waterproof archive with Sarah's recordings, and her rattle, the only thing of hers that had survived. The ship began to sink faster, and James didn't waste time. He could feel the water rising, pouring in from all sides. His fingers grasped the archive and the rattle, both of them cold in his hands as he struggled against the flood. Suddenly the ship lurched again, this time with a sickening, tearing sound. James was thrown across the cockpit, crashing into the bulkhead. His vision blurred, and the ship groaned under the weight of the water, sinking deeper into the depths of the ocean. The archive slipped from his grasp. "No," he gasped, reaching out in desperation, but the flood was too strong. The archive skidded across the floor, heading toward a jagged hole in the bulkhead. The water was rising faster now. A choice, a decision. He could save the archive, all of Sarah's memories, or he could save the rattle, the only physical connection he had left to her. With one last look at the archive, he made his choice. "Hold on, Sarah," he whispered, clutching the rattle tightly in his hand. But then, just as he was about to dive for it, the ship gave one final lurch. Everything went black. James Rowan's grip on the rattle tightened as the ship plunged into the depths of the alien ocean, his world going dark. He had no idea what awaited him in these strange waters, only that everything was about to change forever. James's eyes flickered open, the last remnants of the storm's chaos fading away into a strange, muted silence. His body ached, and his chest felt tight, but he could breathe, shallow but steady. The first thing he saw was the shimmering glow of bioluminescence surrounding him. He blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of his surroundings. His limbs felt sluggish, and when he attempted to move, he found himself lying on a smooth surface, cold yet somehow comforting. His hand instinctively searched for the rattle in his pocket. The rusted toy was still there, clutched tightly in his fingers, its cool metal surface grounding him. His pulse quickened as he tried to sit up, wincing at the ache in his chest. The room around him was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It felt both alive and unnatural, organic yet structured with an alien precision. Above him, the ceiling arched in translucent curves resembling some kind of coral glass, streaked with glowing veins. The walls pulsated with light, veins of energy running through them like lifeblood, giving the entire space an eerie, underwater feel. James's head throbbed, but he pushed through the pain, pushing himself into a sitting position. His survival suit had been removed, replaced by something new, light, flexible armor of an alien design. Strange markings adorned it, shifting like patterns of light, reminding him of something he had seen in his daughter's drawings as a child. What in the world, or underwater world, he thought. A soft hum filled the air as tendrils of bioluminescence seemed to snake out from the walls and softly illuminate the chamber. It was like some kind of alien city, built under the sea, alive with an unsettling calm. Suddenly a figure appeared before him, tall and imposing, almost ethereal in the soft light. Her skin was a polished blue steel, shimmering like burnished metal. Her eyes were too wide, too white, glowing faintly like distant stars. She stood there, towering over him, her horns sweeping back in regal arcs, intricate patterns of glowing symbols running along the edges. "Ah, you wake," she said, her voice deep and resonant, vibrating through the air like the sound of rushing water in a cave. James froze, his mind still hazy with the remnants of the storm, the crash, and the flood that had nearly consumed him. The voice echoed in his ears, and the words made little sense. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the salt water, from the storm. "Who are you?" The figure did not speak immediately. Instead, she observed him with her piercing white eyes, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. "You stand in Laziria, last city of the Meritic people," she finally said, her voice carrying an authority that sent a shiver down his spine. She raised a hand, sweeping it to encompass the room. "I am Leah, Queen of the Deep." James tried to gather his bearings, confusion overwhelming him. Meritic, Queen of the Deep. He struggled to his feet, his body still weak from the crash. his arms shaking as he fought to stand tall in front of the imposing figure. He wasn't sure what he expected. Hostility, maybe, but not this alien calm. Leah's eyes glowed as she looked him over, her expression unreadable. "It seems your ship violated our waters. We claim what crosses the border," she said softly, a hint of something sharp in her tone. James's mind was racing. Claimed, violated. Claimed, he repeated, frowning. "I crashed, I wasn't." "You trespassed," Leah cut him off, her voice like a current pulling him deeper. "And now you belong to the deep." Her lips curled upward, revealing teeth like serrated coral, sharp, cold, unforgiving. James swallowed hard, his mind trying to grasp the enormity of the situation. His ship, his technology, his mission, all gone. He had no idea how far beneath the ocean he was or where he was. But one thing was clear. He was in a place and among people who were far beyond anything he had known. Leah's gaze softened, if only slightly, as she stepped closer. Her tail, a massive thing that looked like a weapon in itself, flicked behind her with quiet power, its movement rhythmic, controlled. She studied him like an ancient predator assessing its prey, but not for its strength. "You are not the first to enter our waters," Leah continued. "Others have tried, but none have stayed, but you, alien, are different." James opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when he saw the strange, smaller figures lining the walls, dozens of them, all watching him with eyes like hers, glowing white in the dim light. They were humanoid in shape, but their features were sharper, their proportions slightly alien, and they had the same strange, shimmering skin, the same unnatural eyes. "Are they your people?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah nodded once, her gaze flickering to her brood. "My children, they are the future of Lazeria. They are learning, as you will if you choose to." James was confused. Learning? What could these creatures possibly want him to teach them? "Teach them?" He looked around at the figures in the room. "Why? What do you want from me?" Leah's gaze hardened slightly. "Strength. You will teach them strength, alien. What is your strength, I wonder? You are soft, without claws, without tail. Tell me what makes you strong." The question hung in the air, and James could feel the weight of her expectations pressing down on him. He didn't have the answer she was looking for, but in this alien place, maybe there was one he could give. The queen stepped back slightly, her towering presence commanding silence. Then she raised her hand, and the room fell even quieter. "This will be your trial, the strength you speak of. Will you rise to it?" James's eyes scanned the room, and for the first time he noticed something in the eyes of her brood, something resembling hunger. The same hunger he had seen in the storm, the same hunger that had driven him to run from the corporate enforcers. Leah's gaze shifted, locking with his. "But be warned, alien," she said softly, her voice like the deep rush of ocean currents. "Fail, and you will never leave this place." He was trapped far beneath an alien ocean, surrounded by creatures whose expectations of him were as unclear as the depths around them. But one thing was certain: surviving this would require more than just engineering. It would require strength, ingenuity, and something else. Something human that they might never understand. Leah turned her back on him, walking toward a set of massive doors, her tail sweeping behind her like an elegant weapon. As she left, she paused just beyond the threshold. "Remember, alien," she said, her voice echoing as the doors slowly slid open. "Strength is not always what you think. Strength is how we survive the storms." The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and James was left alone in the eerie chamber, surrounded by the eyes of creatures who saw only weakness in him, creatures who would decide his fate. He could feel his heart racing. His mind spun with fear and confusion, but also something else: determination. He would survive, he had to. But what could he teach these alien children about strength? What could a human possibly offer them in this unforgiving world? James stood in the Queen's chamber, alone and surrounded by an alien brood. What was his next move? What test awaited him, and could he possibly survive in this underwater world? James's muscles ached as he followed Leah's instructions through winding corridors of living metal and coral glass. Every step sent soft vibrations through the floor, echoing in his chest like distant drums. The alien city pulsed with life, tubes of bioluminescent energy running along the walls, strange machines half organic, half forged, twitching and glowing with every movement of the brood. Ahead, 12 smaller figures waited. Their blue steel skin shimmered in streaked patterns, their horns smaller than Leah's but still formidable. Their tails flicked in restless agitation, and their glowing white eyes fixed on him with unreadable intensity. "You are their teacher now," Leah's words replayed in his mind. "Strength is not always what you think. Strength is how we survive the storms." James exhaled, straightening his shoulders. "Then let's begin." He stepped forward, holding the rusted rattle from his daughter, letting it hang from his fingers. The children blinked, curiosity flickering through their glowing eyes. He placed it on the floor. "This," he said, kneeling so he was at eye level, "is more than just a toy. It is a symbol. Strength begins with protecting what is fragile, understanding it, respecting it." He demonstrated gently, shaking the rattle. A soft metallic tone rang out, bouncing through the chamber. Some of the children tilted their heads, a few reached for it, then hesitated. James moved to the nearest pair, two of the smallest brood, and handed them corroded metal plates, old shields from the city's training grounds. "Hold these," he instructed. "Protect each other. Do not strike first. Protect, not attack." The children's eyes narrowed. Their tails lashed impatiently. One of the taller children, Krellel, stepped forward, glaring. "Why do we obey this soft thing?" he hissed. "We strike first always, that is strength." James met Krellel's gaze steadily. "Strength is not always about attacking. It is about standing when others fall, protecting when others cannot. Survival is not in killing, it is in living and helping others live." A snarl ran through the brood. Clicks and hisses filled the air. Yet James remained calm, demonstrating movements for them. He showed how to brace shields together, how to rotate formations, how to cover a fallen partner. Slowly, reluctantly, they mirrored him, the smallest ones stumbling but trying. Hours passed, sweat dripped from his forehead. His muscles burned. The rattle never left his hand, its weight grounding him, reminding him of Sarah. Then Krellel moved. With sudden aggression, he swung his tail toward one of the smaller children, Sark, aiming to knock him down. James reacted instantly, throwing himself between them. The tail slammed against his shoulder, sending pain exploding up his arm and across his chest. He gritted his teeth and held firm. "Why protect the weak?" Krellel demanded, eyes blazing. James, his vision blurring, answered, voice strained. "Because true strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves." For the first time, silence fell across the chamber. The other children froze, watching. Even Krellel faltered, confusion flickering in his bright eyes. James pressed on, moving the brood through formations, teaching them to rotate shields, cover blind spots, and communicate without words. Slowly, the smallest ones began to hold position, their confidence growing. Krellel's arrogance remained, but cracks in his defiance showed. Hours blurred into a tense rhythm. Sweat, effort, and fear mingled with fleeting sparks of triumph as the children improved. James noticed Sark beginning to move with deliberate precision, shield raised firmly, his fingers still clutching the rusted rattle. James knelt beside him. "Hold this," he said softly. "Stand up, show them what matters." The room was quiet. The glow of the children's eyes reflected in his own, and he saw, for the first time, something else: trust. Hesitant, fragile, but there. The rusted rattle, once a simple child's toy, now a symbol, a bridge across worlds. Then, without warning, a distant boom echoed through the chamber. The translucent walls vibrated as another echoed shortly after, louder this time. Red warning lights pulsed along the floor and ceiling. The children stiffened, their tails lashing, eyes widening with fear. James's heart sank. "What is that?" he whispered. Before anyone could answer, another blast shattered a distant section of the chamber. Alarms shrieked, filling the space with a cacophony of panic. Leah's voice cut through the chaos, cold and commanding. "Rest time is over. Dawn approaches with violence. Now we will see if your lessons are worth anything, human." The children looked to James, fear and trust mingling in their expressions. His chest tightened, his ribs aching from the earlier blow, but he steadied himself. "Everything we practiced matters, not for pride, not for show, for life," he told them, his voice carrying over the alarms. "For life." A phrase began to ripple through the brood. "For life," repeated Sark, clutching the rattle. "For life," echoed Nara. Krellel muttered it reluctantly. James turned toward a branching corridor where the sounds of chaos grew louder. "Shields up," he shouted. "Form a semicircle, protect each other." From the shadows emerged three figures, humanoid but massive, clad in exosuits that glinted red and black in the emergency lights. The insignia on their chest made James's blood run cold. Helios Extraction Corps. Corporate mercenaries, the same people who had chased him across the galaxy for years, now standing between him and survival. The leader stepped forward, voice amplified by his suit. "Rowan, hand over the navigation core and your little protégés might survive. Refuse and they die." James swallowed, his mind racing. The shields around him trembled in the hands of the children. Heavily armed adults, corporate soldiers versus alien children and a single human. He raised a hand, signaling calm. "There is no core, nothing left, my ship is destroyed." The mercenary laughed, advancing with weapons raised. The first pulse of energy struck, scorching the shields of the nearest children. Smoke curled into the air. The smallest pair cried out but held their positions, hands trembling, eyes bright with fear. James moved among them, shouting instructions, rotating positions, reinforcing weak points. The children followed, their movements rough but coordinated. Krellel extended the left flank as he had been taught. Sark held the rattle, eyes wide but unwavering. The corporate soldiers paused, momentarily thrown off by the coordinated defense. James seized the moment. "Do not falter, protect each other." One soldier attempted to flank. Krellel intercepted, raising shields with precision. James noticed something remarkable. The children were responding, reacting, learning under fire. But then a beam struck James squarely across the chest. Pain flared white-hot, searing through him. He staggered, blood blossoming across his jumpsuit. Everything seemed to slow. The children froze, staring at their human teacher bleeding on the floor. The corporate mercenaries faltered at the sight, unsure of what to do next. Then a voice louder than any weapon echoed through the chamber. "Enough." Leah appeared at the entrance, clad in full living armor, her tail lashing with such force sparks flew across the floor. The corporate soldiers were no match. In moments they were overwhelmed by her and the adult meritic warriors she had summoned. James collapsed to his knees, vision swimming, chest burning, but he could see the brood gathering around him. The rusted rattle was still in Sark's small hand, held against his chest. "Why?" Sark asked, glowing eyes fixed on James. "Why do you bleed for us?" James tried to answer, but a cough overtook him, blood flecking his lips. Nara crouched beside him, whispering softly, "He protected us like he taught us. He teaches us to protect each other." Even Krellel stepped forward, his usual arrogance gone. "The surface thing, he has strength," he admitted reluctantly. "Not claws, not tail, but strength still." From the distant balcony above, Leah watched, eyes fixed on the rattle in Sark's hands. The entire room had fallen silent, the weight of her gaze stopping the murmurs and whispers of the meritic adults. James's body trembled from pain, but the children's eyes were on him, and Leah's gaze burned into the chamber. The next test was coming, one that would push his ingenuity, courage, and compassion to the absolute limit, and failure would mean death. The alarms shrieked through the underwater city, a wailing, urgent chorus of warning. Water pulsed along the corridors, evidence of flooding in damaged sections. James pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his chest, and glanced at the brood. "Stay close, stay together," he instructed. "Shields up." The children moved quickly, forming a tight semicircle around him. Sark clutched the rusted rattle, his small hands trembling but steady. Nara and Krellel flanked him, their glowing eyes scanning every shadow. From the southern access corridor came the first wave. Heavily armed human raiders, exosuits glowing red and black, mechanical movements precise and relentless. Their energy weapons licked the walls, sizzling where they struck. James's heart pounded. He had never faced anything like this, human soldiers against alien children, yet he had to believe in what he had taught them. "Remember your pairs," he shouted. "Cover each other's blind spots." The children hesitated, then moved as one, a rough but functional formation. James noted small adjustments, arms shifting, shields overlapping, tails flicking to signal positions. Even Krellel was obeying. A beam of energy struck the center of the formation, scorching the metal shields, smoke curling in the dim light. The heat radiated through the children's palms, but they held. James rotated the front line, moving exhausted but steady, reinforcing weak points. "Rotate, rotate, keep the wall tight," he called. One raider tried to flank them, moving quickly along the corridor wall. Krellel reacted instinctively, pushing 3 smaller children into position and extending his shield to intercept the flanking attack. James moved to the second line, adjusting formations, rotating the children in a rhythm he had drilled them to follow. It worked for a moment. The raiders' attack was deflected, sparks flying, metal scorching, but the constant strain began to take a toll. The children were small, their stamina limited, and James could see the fatigue creeping into their movements. Then it happened. The lead raider surged forward, focusing all his fire on Sark and Nara. The shields began to glow white-hot. Fall back," James shouted. There was no second line left. Every child was engaged in the front. One raider lunged toward Nara with an energy blade. Without thinking, James sprinted forward, throwing himself between the blade and Nara. Pain exploded in his chest as the weapon ripped across him, searing through armor and flesh alike. He staggered but remained standing, pressing his hands to the wound. Blood pooled beneath him, red and stark against the metal floor. The chamber fell silent. The children froze, staring at their human teacher, the man they had come to trust and depend on. Even the raiders hesitated, surprised at his self-sacrifice. James gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain upright. His voice, though strained and ragged, carried to the children. "Protect each other. Move as one." Nara looked at him, fear and admiration mingling in her luminous eyes. Sark pressed his small hand against James's shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why do you risk yourself for us?" James coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Because strength is not in striking first. It's in holding, protecting, surviving together." Krellel stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced with quiet acknowledgement. "The surface thing, he is strong," he admitted. "Not in claws or tail, but in what matters." The raiders, faltering under the sudden shift in momentum, were overwhelmed as Leah and her adult warriors arrived. Clad in living armor, their tails flicking like weapons, they fell upon the invaders with brutal efficiency. Sparks flew as metal clashed with metal, the air ringing with alien roars and the hissing of energy weapons. James sank to his knees, exhausted, blood loss overwhelming him. But he could see the children gathering around him, their earlier fear replaced by awe and trust. The rusted rattle remained in Sark's hands, a symbol of resilience, of human ingenuity, and of compassion. "Why?" Sark asked again, echoing Krellel's earlier words. "Why do you bleed for us?" James coughed, trying to form words, but the blood and pain made it impossible. Nara whispered, "He protected us like he taught us. He teaches us to protect each other." Even Krellel nodded slightly, the lesson sinking in. The concept of strength, of protecting the vulnerable, was foreign to them, but they were beginning to understand. Leah appeared beside him, her massive form looming, eyes glowing brightly. She reached down, lifting the rusted rattle from Sark's hands. The chamber was silent as she held it aloft. "Silence," her voice boomed, echoing through the underwater city. "Strength is not hunger. Strength is not the first strike. Strength is holding life in your hands and not letting it go." The brood stared at their queen, horns lowered in what James recognized as shame and understanding. The adults around the chamber murmured, uncertainty replacing bloodlust. Leah knelt beside James, examining his wound with clinical precision. "You chose the rusted toy over your ship's memory core," she said quietly. "You chose substance over data. Why?" James coughed, struggling to answer. "Because some things cannot be replaced." The queen's glowing eyes narrowed, studying him with a new intensity. Then she raised her voice, addressing the entire chamber. "The ancient law of Lazeria is clear. Blood spilled in defense of the brood binds the defender to the brood forever." A shock rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose, some in protest, others in agreement. The chamber buzzed with tension, the final verdict uncertain. "Silence," Lyria commanded, and the crowd obeyed instantly. "I call a tribunal. The final test approaches with dawn." James felt consciousness slipping away as his blood continued to pool beneath him. He glanced at the brood, Sark clutching the rattle, eyes wide, glowing faintly in the dim light. Dawn was coming, and with it, a reckoning. As darkness closed in on James, the tribunal loomed, and he knew the outcome would determine not only his fate, but the fate of the children he had fought so desperately to protect. What judgment awaited him at dawn? Would his humanity be enough to survive in this alien world? The air in the chamber felt thick with tension, as if the very walls were holding their breath. James's body was a battlefield of pain, every breath a struggle as the bioluminescent tendrils pulsed around him, shifting with the faintest vibrations. He couldn't tell how much time had passed, minutes, hours, or days, but the pressure in the air told him something was coming. He blinked through the fog of exhaustion, the metallic taste of blood still fresh on his tongue. His chest throbbed where the raider's blade had cut deep. He felt the cool sting of bioluminescent healing fluid coursing over the wound, but it did little to numb the ache that had settled in his bones. The chamber had changed since his fall. The children had moved away from him, a few standing near Leah's warriors, others sitting in silence, their eyes fixed on the floor, as if afraid to look at the human who had sacrificed himself for them. Dawn had arrived. The chamber was filled with quiet murmurs as the crowd gathered, the meridic adults circling like a gathering storm. The walls shimmered with a soft iridescence, as if they too were waiting for what was to come. In the center of the room stood a raised dais, large enough for James to kneel upon, an odd mixture of ceremonial stone and living coral, glowing faintly with a pale, otherworldly light. Leah stood beside the dais, her presence commanding and regal, her tail flicking slowly with an air of deliberation. The brood, including Krellel, Sark, and Nara, stood at attention in front of her, their eyes still glowing but now filled with something else, something far more thoughtful than the hunger that had previously filled their gaze. James pushed himself to his knees, the weight of the rusted rattle in his hand grounding him. The pain from his wound flared, but he ignored it, focusing on the brood. These children, who had been on the verge of destruction, now looked to him for answers. They had seen the value of protecting one another, of standing firm in the face of danger. A faint murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd as several meridic adults stepped forward, their eyes cold and filled with judgment. An elder, his horns weathered with age, approached the dais, his tail dragging slightly behind him as if weighed down by centuries of tradition. He was older than Leah, his skin darkened and scarred, the sharpness of his gaze tempered by wisdom, perhaps even regret. "The law is absolute," the elder intoned, his voice carrying across the room like the weight of 1,000 years. "No surface dweller may join the brood. The alien's interference is unrequested. His blood, though spilled, taints our waters." A sharp hiss of agreement came from the crowd. James's chest tightened, the weight of the accusations pressing down on him. He knew what was at stake. This was more than his life. This was the future of the children he had tried to protect. But he wasn't done fighting. He couldn't afford to be. Another meridic stepped forward, this one a female with intricate patterns on her horns. She was younger than the elder, but there was fire in her eyes, compassion, something rare among the meridic. "The law is wisdom, yes," she said, her voice carrying a different weight. "But wisdom must evolve. The alien saved our youngest. Without him, we would be speaking of death, not survival. The same brood he is now condemned for teaching how to defend themselves was saved by his actions." The murmur of discontent shifted, turning into something more like contemplation. Some of the adults nodded, the tension in the air thinning slightly as the crowd absorbed her words. The elder scoffed, the sound grating against the stone. "Wisdom," he spat. "Weakness, then. This soft creature, this surface dweller, brings chaos. He taught our children to defend themselves, but he failed in the most basic of things. He brought the humans to our doorstep. The raiders would have killed us all had they not been stopped." "Enough," Leah's voice rang out, sharp as the crack of thunder. She had not moved, but now her eyes fixed on the elder with a quiet intensity that silenced him instantly. "You speak of chaos, but what is chaos?" Leah asked, her tone thoughtful, as though she were testing the very fabric of reality. She stepped forward, her tail swaying gently behind her, her gaze sweeping over the gathered brood. "Is it chaos that an alien saved my children?" she asked, her voice steady. "Is it chaos that an outsider who knows nothing of our ways risked everything to protect the weak, to defend life? The same children whose strength you say he has tainted. He taught them how to survive, how to protect, how to stay strong." Leah turned her gaze to James, her glowing eyes narrowing as if she were peering into his soul. The chamber was eerily silent, every eye fixed on her. "James Rowan," she said, the name heavy with significance. "You have taught us much, and yet you are an outsider. I would know what you have learned. What have you learned, human?" James looked up at her, his voice hoarse but strong. "I've learned that strength isn't about power or blood. It's about protecting those who need it. It's about standing together no matter what. It's about survival, even when everything seems lost." He looked at the brood, Sark, Krellel, Nara, his children now as far as he was concerned. The future of this strange city and its people. "We don't have to be like the ones who attack. We can be better. I can teach them to be better." Leah's tail flicked once, her glowing eyes studying him with an intensity that felt as if it would burn through him. The chamber held its breath, the collective pulse of the crowd slowing, waiting for her decision. The elder scowled. "You speak of weakness, of sentiment, you are a fool." Leah's eyes never left James as she raised her hand. "I do not speak of weakness, I speak of survival." Her voice cut through the murmurs of dissent like a blade. "The alien saved my brood, he bled for them, and now his blood is tied to ours. You will honor the blood debt." The crowd fell into stunned silence. The elder opened his mouth to protest, but Leah silenced him with a single look. She moved toward James, her eyes softening ever so slightly. "By our law," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber, "blood spilled in defense of the brood binds the defender to the brood forever." She reached down and placed a hand on James's shoulder. The contact was cold, yet something passed between them, a recognition, a bond forged in the fires of struggle and survival. The brood, who had once regarded him with suspicion, with distrust, now looked to him with something different: respect. The elder looked defeated. "This is madness," he muttered, but the murmurs of the crowd had shifted. Leah raised her head, her tail lashing once in satisfaction. "It is done. The alien's fate is sealed. He will stay with us as one of us. His bond to the brood is unbroken." The room fell silent once more, but this time the silence was filled with something more than judgment. It was acceptance. James didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. He had found a purpose here in this strange, alien world. And perhaps for the first time in years, he felt like he had a place to belong. As Leah's proclamation echoed in the chamber, the crowd began to murmur in agreement. But deep in the shadows, a new threat stirred. Something else was watching, something more dangerous than the raiders, and its eyes were now fixed on James and the brood. The chamber was still. The echo of Leah's decree rang in the silence, a finality hanging in the air like the last whisper of a dying storm. The brood, once divided, now stood united. Even Krellel, who had shown the most defiance, seemed to have lowered his guard, though his eyes still burned with questions. But there was something else in the air, an undercurrent of tension that James couldn't shake. Leah turned toward the gathered brood, her posture regal, her tail curled tightly behind her. The room was alive with energy, but it was different now. The fire of uncertainty had dimmed, replaced by something akin to anticipation. For a moment the tension was palpable, but not in a way James was used to. This wasn't the desperation of enemies closing in, it wasn't the sharpness of a battle. It was something deeper, something primal. "Tonight we celebrate." Leah's voice broke the silence, and her words were almost drowned out by the sudden eruption of noise from the crowd. The adults, still wary, stood in clusters, their glowing eyes turning to each other with murmurs. The children, though, were wide-eyed, as if unsure how to react to the shift in the air. James, however, wasn't sure if the celebration would last. He could feel the heaviness in the air, the impending danger that had lingered ever since he had arrived. He had learned something valuable from his time in the Meridic City. Survival here wasn't about strength alone. It was about knowing when to fight and when to submit, when to survive and when to run. And right now, he had no idea which one he needed to do. He reached down to touch the rusted rattle in his hand again. Sarah's gift. It had become a symbol of life, of resilience, of the love he had lost, and of the lessons he had to teach. But he couldn't escape the feeling that there was something bigger at play, something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface of this fragile piece. Leah turned back to him, her glowing eyes sharp as ever. "James Rowan," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, "you will stay with us. You will teach our brood to become strong. But you must also learn the price of survival here. The city will not bow to weakness, even if you have proven yourself." James met her gaze, his chest tightening. He had expected a challenge. He had expected the trials, the tests. But now he realized they were just beginning. "Do you think they will accept you, alien?" Leah's voice was quieter now, almost intimate, but still with the sharp edge of command. "The others will see your presence as an affront. They will challenge your place here, and they will try to remove you." His pulse quickened. He had known it was coming. "You speak of the elders," James said, "of the ones who think I'm too soft, too weak for their world." Leah's tail flicked once, her gaze narrowing. "The elders are not the only threat. There are others in Lazeria who have long held power, power that cannot be easily challenged, not even by me. Their grip is tight, but your presence has already shaken it." James felt the weight of her words, the gravity of what he had stepped into. Power. He had seen it before, the dangerous allure of it, the way it controlled lives and destinies. And now, in this alien world, he was caught in a struggle he had never fully understood. He had saved the brood, but what would it cost him? What price would they ask for his survival here? Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway, and the room fell silent again. A group of meritic warriors, larger than the others, strode into the chamber, their expressions cold, calculating. James tensed, instinctively moving to stand in front of the brood. Krello followed suit, the others hesitating behind them, shields instinctively raised. Leah stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention. "What is it, Nior?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with something darker. "You come at a time of celebration." Nior, a tall meritic with scars across his face and thick, muscular plating, didn't answer immediately. He only stared at James, his white eyes cold and assessing. "The surface dweller is here," Nior said finally, his voice grating. "And you, Queen, have allowed him to stay, but I must ask again, what makes him worthy of our protection?" Leah's tail flicked again, a movement so subtle yet so menacing. "He is worthy because he saved my brood," she replied, her tone unwavering. "He is worthy because he fights to protect, to survive." Nior scoffed. "We fight to conquer, we fight to dominate. And you," he pointed at James, his finger like a spear, "you fight to preserve weakness. You have brought chaos to our shores." The air in the room crackled. The rest of the meritic warriors behind Nior shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking between Leah and the human who had somehow earned her favor. "I fight for life," James said, his voice steady. He couldn't show fear, not now. "I fight to ensure the survival of those who can't fight for themselves. I fight because the world I come from is full of those who would kill for power, and I won't let that happen again." A low murmur ran through the room. The warriors didn't seem convinced, but something in his words seemed to make them pause. Nior narrowed his eyes. "Then prove it, human," he spat. "Prove that you have the strength to survive here. If you fail, your fate will be sealed. You will not have the protection of our queen. You will die like the others who came before you." Leah's tail lashed violently. "Enough," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "You dare challenge me in my own city? You dare to question my decisions?" Nior took a step back, bowing his head slightly in deference to Leah's wrath, but his gaze never left James. "This is not finished, Queen. Mark my words, he will fail." The warriors turned and exited the chamber, their heavy steps echoing down the hallway. James exhaled slowly, his body aching but his mind racing. Leah's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned to face the brood. "We have much to do," she said quietly. "The test is not over. And James Rowan," she added, her voice softer now, "you will face more than just the threat of the raiders. You will face the full weight of Lazeria's judgment." James's pulse quickened. He wasn't done yet. This city, this alien world, had more tests in store for him than he had ever imagined. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming, but he had no choice but to stand. He had to protect them. He had to survive. The price of survival was steep, and the test had only just begun. As the tension in the room began to subside, James couldn't shake the feeling that Nior's words would not be the last challenge he would face. He could already feel the eyes of the meritic watching, waiting for him to fail. Would he be able to live up to Leah's expectations, or would the shadow of power and tradition crush him before he could prove his worth? The first light of dawn filtered through the translucent coral glass of the ceremonial chamber, painting the underwater city in hues of warm gold and pale blue. James Rowan stirred, blinking against the glow, the remnants of pain and exhaustion still pressing against him like a heavy tide. The rusted rattle lay in his hand, a cold reminder of both loss and hope. Beside it rested the royal amulet Leah had placed in his palm during the tribunal, two symbols of strength, two definitions of power, love and authority intertwined. He rose slowly, shoulders stiff, muscles aching, yet determination pushed him forward. Around him, the meritic children, Sark, Krello, Nara, and the others, stood at attention, shields in hand, their glowing eyes reflecting a new understanding. They were no longer just pupils. They had become a brood forged through the crucible of survival and trust. Leah entered the chamber, her form imposing yet composed, tail coiled with measured grace. "The test is complete," she announced, her voice carrying across the concentric rows of adults and children. "James Rowan has proven the principles of strength beyond tradition. Strength is not only in dominance or fear, It is in protection, in empathy, in the courage to act when others cannot. The crowd murmured, some skeptical, some reverent, but the weight of her declaration hung heavy. The elders, including Niwer, exchanged glances, their authority challenged by the undeniable proof of the human's influence on the brood. James stepped forward, addressing the children first. Look at what you've accomplished. You learned to fight, to defend, to survive, but more importantly, you learned to protect each other. He raised his voice, feeling it echo in the vast chamber. Remember that, always, strength without compassion is no strength at all. It is a weakness that destroys everything around it. Sark held up the rattle, its sound faint but resonant in the space. For life, he said, echoing the mantra that had carried them through the battle. For life, Nara repeated. Krell's voice was quieter, hesitant, yet firm. For life. James's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He had lost Sarah, yet in these alien children he had found a chance to teach, to shape, to honor her memory. The rusted rattle was no longer just a toy. It had become a symbol bridging worlds, a physical representation of the lessons of humanity. Leah stepped forward, placing a hand on James's shoulder. Her eyes, white and glowing, held a strange intensity, recognition, respect, perhaps even gratitude. You will remain with us, she said. You are bound to the brood as the law dictates, but not as a servant. You are a guide, a teacher, and a protector. Your humanity is an asset, not a flaw. James nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had found a place here, a purpose beyond survival. Yet he also understood that the city of Lazeria was still full of challenges, old traditions, and factions wary of change. He would have to earn trust every day, not through fear or power, but through example. The children stepped forward, one by one kneeling before him, shields held across their chests, tails coiled behind them, not in submission but in acknowledgement. Sark, the smallest, knelt last, pressing the rusted rattle against his chest. Father, he said, the word awkward but sincere in their alien tongue. James's throat tightened. He reached down, placing a hand on Sark's shoulder. I will protect you, always, he promised, his voice strong despite the fatigue. From the upper balcony, the meritic adults observed in silence. Some eyes glowed with hesitation, some with newfound respect. Even Niwer, who had challenged him so fiercely, now watched without anger, curiosity flickering behind the stern exterior. The balance of power had shifted, subtly yet undeniably. Leah's voice echoed through the chamber once more. Strength is not only in claws, fangs, or tail. It is in the courage to act for those who cannot act for themselves. It is in the bonds you forge and in the memories you choose to honor. This is humanity. This is what the surface dweller has brought us. A hush fell over the city, the glow of dawn reflecting in every eye, as if the meritic were absorbing the lesson at the deepest level of their being. James looked out over the vast ocean beyond the coral domes, thinking of Sarah, of Earth, and of the impossible journey that had brought him here. The children rose, forming a circle around him, shields overlapping, tails flicking in synchronization. They had learned discipline, strength, and compassion. They were ready. James held the rattle and the amulet tightly. One symbol of memory, one of authority. Both tangible reminders of what mattered most: connection, protection, and the courage to act. Rise, he said softly. And they did. 12 pairs of glowing eyes turned toward him, awe and curiosity mingling in their gaze. Even Krell, pride still radiating from every line of his posture, raised his head and met James's eyes with acknowledgement. We have much to learn from each other, James said, his voice steady, and much to build together. Leah's mouth curved in what might have been the faintest hint of a smile. Indeed, she said, the dawn has broken, let the teaching truly begin. Beyond the chamber, the underwater city stretched into the endless dark, alive with movement, anticipation, and the hum of alien energy. New challenges awaited, factions, traditions, and threats that James could not yet see. But for the first time in years, he felt purpose, family, and home. The rusted rattle and the royal amulet rested in his hands, symbols of past, present, and future. And as the brood and the city watched, James Rowan, human among aliens, stood ready to face whatever dawn would bring. James had survived the test, not through violence or dominance, but through compassion, ingenuity, and human resilience. The brood had learned to balance strength with empathy, and somewhere beyond the coral domes, unseen threats still lingered, waiting for the next challenge, the next storm, the next trial. But James now understood that in this world, humanity, its courage, creativity, and compassion, was a force even the alien depths could not ignore.